Well, to discuss the importance of this visit, we're now joined by Shailesh Kumar, Senior Analyst Asia at the EuroAsia Group. Shailesh, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18. We heard from Secretary of State Tillerson before he arrived in India, and today at that joint press conference with the Minister of External Affairs, Sushma Swaraj, a lot of the conversation was around the issue of Pakistan, with Tillerson saying that he had a very frank and open conversation with leaders in Islamabad, conveying the expectations that the U.S. has with Pakistan, also adding that the U.S. wants to work with Pakistan in a positive way, as they believe that that is in their long-term interest. So when we talk about the U.S., India, Pakistan equation, how significant are the comments that have come in and this visit in particular?
Sure, thanks for having me. The visit is very noteworthy. I think what Tillerson may have said in Pakistan is very diplomatic. It's what he has to say. I mean, he can't go to Pakistan and be overly aggressive or negative towards the leadership. So he has to say what he has to say. But I think when you look at what U.S.'s approach to the region has been, we have to look further back. For example, the new strategy for South Asia that was unveiled in August, the overall comments that have been coming from this government in the U.S. towards the region. I think the most important thing is that there has been a massive shift in U.S. foreign policy. It's one that sees Pakistan as a potential sponsor of terror. America hasn't officially designated it that. I think a full designation may not ever happen, and if it does, it's a long ways out. But they're beginning to see the region more from India's perspective, and I think that's a huge change, particularly if you think about the 1980s, for example, just 30 years ago. U.S. approach to Afghanistan was very much aligned with Pakistan. They did not want Indian involvement. They did not want India's input in terms of how Afghanistan should be shaped. And now it's the exact opposite, where the U.S. wants India to take a leadership role in Afghanistan, to have a bigger say in how the governance structure should be maintained. And they want Pakistan to have a smaller footprint. So it's been a 180 in terms of foreign policy. I think when it comes to terrorism, what Tillerson said before the trip is even more noteworthy. What he said on the trip is also noteworthy, obviously, which is that, again, America is seeing terrorism in South Asia from the prism of India's perspective. And this is a big title change, a big shift in terms of how America is viewing India and its concerns with Pakistan.
Let me move beyond Pakistan and talk to you about how America is viewing India in the context of China, Shailesh. We're speaking in the context of where Xi Jinping has, the succession has now been done. How do you see the new equation between the U.S. and Indian administration in the context of China?
So I think, again, going back to Tillerson's speech, he made a speech last week here in Washington, D.C., and there's always been a suspicion in many quarters that America's interests in India are primarily to build up India as a hedge against China. And that's been kind of more of the conspiracy theory view as to why America is interested in India. Tillerson, in some ways, articulated that they want to see India rise as a counterweight to China. He didn't use those exact words, but if you read between the lines, he did say that India and China have risen, but India's risen in a more responsible manner. And that's pretty alarming words, or pretty strong words from a U.S. government to say. So in terms of what this means or how U.S. views India and vis-a-vis China, I think it's pretty obvious that America wants India to be the regional power. Now, that doesn't mean the Asian power. That doesn't mean that they're looking towards India to dominate China in any way. But they do want India to be a regional power within South Asia. That, again, is a big change from the past when America wanted a balance of power in South Asia between India and Pakistan. But then, again, by being a regional power, that inevitably makes India a counterweight to China. One way or another, that's what ends up happening. I think I think U.S. is watching China's rise very closely, and they do see an ally in India as a counterweight to this.
Well, moving beyond that to talk about the bilateral engagement between the U.S. And India, Shailesh, Tillerson talking about the F-16 and F-18 fighter jet deals, that is up for discussion. Sushma Swaraj bringing up the H-1B issue. On the bilateral trade and investment front, where do you see this partnership headed now?
So, Shireen, I think on investment and trade, unfortunately, there's not much progress, and that's because the bilateral investment treaty on the Indian side has been stuck. It hasn't really advanced. But that doesn't necessarily mean that investments, period, aren't doing well. I mean, U.S. investments in India are doing quite well. Overall foreign direct investments in India are at record highs. So I think absent a bilateral investment trade treaty or absent a direct push by other government, the investment and trade cycle will be okay. On the F-16 point, though, one of the challenges from the U.S. side is if you take a look at most countries that buy U.S. defense equipment, the procurement process is G to G, where the government decides they want to buy a U.S. weapon system and then they directly buy it. With India, the process is different. There is a procurement process. It's not G to G always. I mean, it ends up being G to G, but there is a process in terms of how contracts are reviewed or awarded. And that becomes a little bit of a challenge in terms of using defense policy to further foreign policy. And an F-16 deal or an F-18 deal between the U.S. and India would really cement the relationship further. And I think the U.S. views it from that perspective as well. The challenge is, how does the Indian defense establishment agree to buy a system for those purposes? And that's kind of where the friction lies.
And we haven't seen any forward movement on the RFP from India just yet. But Shailesh, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks very much for joining us to make sense of Rex Tillerson's India visit and its implications.